Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. Today I got 9 dark Let's Not Meet stories for your viewing consumption. I know I've been away for a while, but I'm back now, and I got a few projects in the works, such as the top 15 Twilight Zone episodes, as well as a complete guide to Made in Abyss, the best horror anime to ever come out. So keep an eye out for those videos as I work on them and give you updates via Twitter. Please follow me on Twitter in order to get updates about my current cycle and work schedule. With that being said, understand that none of the stories here are actually written by me, but rather by the lovely people at Let's Not Meet. Also, the stories are not just narrated by me, but rather by a good friend of mine, Swamp Dweller. A link to his channel at the end of the video, as well as linked in the description below. Enjoy the stories, and feel free to give these authors a thumbs up by visiting their pages on Let's Not Meet, link down below. Sit back, relax, turn down the lights, and welcome to my dungeon. We Can Chase Him Down with One Headlight by Spiteful Tomato. For reference, I'm a 20-year-old male who weighs about 200 pounds and I'm 6 foot tall. I live in a suburban area of a very large city, which I won't disclose because if I did, it would make it very easy to figure out where I live. This experience happened to me about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still a bit shaken up by it. I worked as a busboy on the weekend at a popular catering hall near where I lived. I had been working there for a little over a month at that point, and it was actually my last day working there since I had another job that was offering me more hours with better pay if I was available on the weekends. I had to work a party that lasted from 7 p.m. up until midnight, and I had to stay for almost 2 hours after the party was over to reset the room for the following morning. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, we finished resetting the room and we were told that we could leave. I was about to walk out of the building when my boss ran over me and asked if I could help her move some tables to the upstairs room real quick, which I did. We placed the tables where it needed to go and we both went downstairs to leave. At that point, we walked outside, said goodnight to each other as she was getting inside of her Uber car that she had requested to take her home. Now, due to the numerous setbacks I have in life, I unfortunately do not have my driver's license yet, and the catering hall was only about a 30 to 40 minute walk from my house. I don't mind walking, but during my time working there, my parents were nice enough to drive me to and from work. My mom told me to call her when I got out of work and she'd give me a ride as she didn't want me walking home by myself that late at night. I gave her a call, and her phone immediately went to voicemail, indicating that it was off. I tried again, and the same thing happened. I thought to myself she must have fallen asleep on the couch and forgot to put her phone on the charger, so it must have died. She does this very often at night, and I could understand the issues that one would have while trying to go to bed. I called my dad, hoping that his phone was on silent, as it usually was when he went to sleep. As luck would have it, it must have been, since I called his phone a few times and got no answer. All of my coworkers had left, so I couldn't really ask anyone for a ride to go home, and the only bus nearby that would cut my walking trip would only cut it in half, and it stopped running at midnight, so I couldn't take the bus home either. I also didn't call an Uber since I forgot my debit card and only had 2 singles on me. Looks like I had to say fuck it and walk home instead. To give some perspective, the catering hall was located between a service road that runs along a major highway and a street that rode along the coast side. In order to get home, I had to walk down the service road for about 10 minutes until it hit the aforementioned coast side, which went underneath the highway and onto another side. Then, I had to walk 2 more blocks up that road until it hits another street that I'd need to turn right on and walk for another 10 minutes. Half of which is spent walking up a hill until I reached the street that entered the community I lived in. I begun walking, and about 5 minutes later, I passed a bar where I see a car idling in the parking lot with only the left headlight shining. The car was a white Toyota Camry, if I'm not mistaken, and there were 2 other guys in the car smoking a cigarette. I quickly glanced over while passing by and didn't think too much of what I had seen. The bar closed at 1 in the morning, and I figured that these are 2 guys driving somewhere who pulled into the parking lot for a quick smoke. I turned onto the road that runs underneath the highway and was crossing the service road on the other side when I got the sudden urge to look behind me. I quickly took a look back, and I see the same car driving down the road I was walking along. It wasn't exactly pitch black, but it was still relatively dark enough at that point where I might not have recognized the car if both headlights had been shining instead of just the one alone shining in the darkness. I continued walking and eventually turned right onto the road with the hill that I mentioned earlier when they slowed down next to me and the passenger rolled down the window to talk to me. The road I turned onto was a lot darker than the road I was walking on before, so I wasn't able to make out exactly what either of them looked like. From what I could make out, they were possibly in their late 20s and wearing very dark clothing. The driver was a white male, while the passenger, on the other hand, was a black male. The passenger rolls down the window and asks what I'm doing walking so late, to which I respond, I'm just walking home from work. He asked me, would you like us to give you a ride home? I responded by saying, that's very kind of you, but I'm walking by myself. Thank you for the offer, though. He gets visibly annoyed, and in a somewhat agitated tone, he says, nah, man, it's pretty dark and dangerous outside. You should let us drive you. We'll get you home safe and sound. Come on, you can trust us. At this point, the road was empty, except for this car containing 2 men and I. I get a bad feeling in my gut, telling me just to get away from these men. I decline once again and dart behind the car and walk across the street. I walk up, turn left into a parking lot of a different community about 2 blocks from my own that had a chain in front of it preventing people without a proper key from parking inside the lot. All of a sudden, the driver rolls down the window and yells, "Get the fuck back here, you bitch!" He flips a U-turn and pulls up to the entrance of the parking lot, and the passenger jumps out and begins chasing me. The driver peels off, presumably to get down the road on the other side to attempt to ambush me. My adrenaline immediately hits me, and I begin sprinting away from this crazy man. He then yells, "We're gonna give you a ride! Stop running away from us!" I looked back and I see that we had a bit of a distance between us. He looked somewhat chubby and probably wasn't expecting me to be able to run so fast since I'm slightly overweight myself. I turned right down the road and continued sprinting until I hear a car squeal just down behind me. I look back and see a single headlight in the distance speeding down the road, and the man who was chasing after me is starting to gain on me. I start freaking out, and I run and turn left onto the next road I reach, and then started making a break for the park since the area of the park I was running down towards was dark and thick with trees, so I figured I could lose them in there. As I ran into the park, struggling to continue sprinting as I was losing my breath, I look back to see a car turn on the road. The driver stops the car and yells at his friend, "Get back in the car now! The cops are hanging out back there and they might see us! Leave him behind! We're getting the fuck out of here!" The man chasing me stops and runs back towards the car. He flings the door open and jumps in. As soon as he slams the door, the driver shuts and takes a U-turn and speeds off and turns right into the road up ahead and disappeared. The park is extremely large, and I remember my parents talking about a good number of drug deals taking place in the park, and the police were starting to send officers to patrol the area at night to bust up any drug deals they witness, and they must have spooked my pursuers. I jogged quickly into the park and hid in the darkness underneath the trees for about 20 minutes just to be sure that they were definitely gone, and try to calm myself down as much as I could. Afterwards, I walked through the park towards the exit into my community with my senses on hyper alert just to be sure that creeps weren't back. And hell, for all I knew, maybe there was another weirdo lurking around that would torment me if they spotted me. I exited the park and ran down the block, made a right onto my street and quickly unlocked my door, went inside, and then quickly locked it. My dog started growling upstairs, but stopped once he saw me walking up the stairs and into the living room. I looked to my right to see my mom pass out on the couch with the TV still on as I predicted before. I walked into my room, flopped to my bed, both exhausted mentally and physically. My dog must have noticed something was wrong and jumped onto my bed and proceeded to lick me and try to comfort me. I was so relieved that I'd gotten away from those two guys, and I was never happier to be in the safety of my own house than I was that moment. I always knew it would be dangerous to walk alone at night, and usually don't, but I had hoped when I did, I would be okay. I was proven wrong that night. I quickly ran my dog outside and changed into a t-shirt and shorts once I got back in. I was thinking the what ifs the entire time, but eventually I got myself to stop thinking of what ifs and accept that nothing happened and to be thankful that I will never have to know what would have happened. I managed to calm myself well enough to fall asleep. I woke up close to noon later that day, and I walked into the living room. I said hello to my parents, and my mom gets up and hugs me and apologizes profusely for falling asleep when she was supposed to pick me up. She said she woke up at around 5 in the morning and freaked out that she had fallen asleep and that something bad might have happened to me. She rushed to my room to see myself sound asleep and relieved that I got home safe. Now, mind you, I didn't say anything about what happened on my walk home that night, as I knew it would devastate them to hear that they almost lost their son, and my mom would not be able to live with the guilt that she could have prevented with the whole encounter if she only stayed awake enough to come pick me up. Up until this point, I usually haven't told anyone except for my very close friends about this experience. I have no idea what those two guys' intentions were once I got into the car, but I knew for a fact that they were up to no good, and I didn't think I ever want to find out what they were. I'm just glad I'm safe after sharing this experience with you guys, and I hope to move on from it. So, two guys who chased me down and got in a car and really should have had their headlight fixed. Let's not meet ever again.
Do You Feel Cleansed? Submitted by Danieline. Posting this story as it recently became relevant in my life again. I had a bizarre upbringing, and I've spent the last 5 years of my life consulting my uncles, aunts, and my dad about what really happened when I was growing up. I have an older brother, and I was born in Arizona in the early 90s. My mom and dad basically got together because my brother was conceived a few months into their relationship and they were in their early 30s, so it just made sense. My dad swears up and down to this day that my mom was, for all intents and purposes, very normal before I was born. But something shifted after we moved to Utah for a job my dad had taken when my brother and I was 1 and he was 2. From what I understand, things were pretty innocent at first. My mom had made the decision to be a homemaker, and at some point she got very lonely and started penning elaborate calligraphy-style letters to both her and my dad's extended family members. My uncles and aunts really liked it at first. However, there came a point when they stopped responding to them because my mom became a born-again Christian, and the content of the letters increasingly revolved around that. This really set her off. She became incredibly paranoid and accused my dad of cheating on her and her family and his family of deliberately trying to cut her out of her family. It escalated into some pretty massive fights between my parents, some of which I do actually remember. One day, when I was around 4 and my brother was around 5, my mom served my dad with divorce papers and asked him to remove himself from her house. They agreed to meet up and divide possessions. When my dad arrived at the house to catalog the property, not only was my mother not there, but my brother and I were missing as well, as the car he had purchased with the equity on their house. All of my brother Mom and I's closed personal belongings were nowhere to be found. My recollection of this are hazy, but I have grainy memories of the drive to Waco, Texas. It was the middle of the night and raining heavily, and I cried a lot because I couldn't see through the fog out of our car windows. Now, just a little context here. I promise this will all come together. My mom was married 3 times. Her first marriage was to help a friend get his green card. Her second marriage was to one of her closest friends, we'll call him George. Her third marriage was to my father, and we'll call him Jeff. George was the love of my mom's life. Around the early to mid 80s in Arizona, she discovered that he was involved in an elaborate fraud and embezzlement scheme with the credit union for which he worked. She actually reported him to the police because he had started involving her social security number in the scheme. He was arrested, and oddly, my mom bailed him out. When his court date arrived, he had long fled the state. George moved to Waco, Texas. There he worked at a furniture stripping store for cash and was fugitive from justice until the day he died. I'm sure you see where this is going. My mom essentially kidnapped my brother and I and drove us 20 hours across 3 state borders. Also, this was very recently post-Branch Davidian's campground siege Waco, so it wasn't exactly the most family-friendly place to live. I asked my dad if he filed a police report. He said that he did, but that police didn't take him seriously. This was around the time that people were on super high alert about kidnappings, and he believes that the PD just didn't see a mom kidnapping her own kids as a priority. We moved into a small yellow house with George and his entire extended family that had a nasty fire infestation and a caved-in roof in the kitchen. During the day, my brother and I did go to the elementary school. At night, we worked in the furniture stripping shop that George worked at, basically just pulling staples out of couches and restapling new fabric onto some pieces, etc. George was a raging alcoholic, who was also physically abusive. Our time with him came to an end one night when I was almost 6 years old. I awoke to my mom screaming for help, and when I ran out to the living room and encountered George beating the shit out of her, my brother and I called the police. George fled and an officer took my mom's statement. The next day, with little warning or communication, my mom packed us up in the car again and drove us back to Arizona. Apparently, she showed up with us on my dad's doorstep. He had since moved back from Utah. A lot of other unpleasant shit happened after my dad briefly got back together with my mom. She really buckled down on the religious nuttery, and he stayed with her for about 3 years. He broke down after she forced him to attend weekly meetings that are usually court-ordered for sexual predators because she found out he looks at porn shocking. That last thing she ever said to him, standing over him as he knelt in the yard pulling weeds with a butter knife, was, "Do you feel cleansed, Jeff? Do you feel the Lord working?" He says this was a direct quote that he will never forget. We weren't allowed to celebrate holidays or birthdays growing up. After my dad left, my mom used positively medieval methods to punish and discipline my brother and I. Beaten with the buckle side of a belt, forced to consume bars of soap and sticks of deodorant. She would rip up our homework and steal my car keys, convince both of us that our extended family hated my brother and I and alienated us from them. The list goes on. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her standing over my bed whispering Old Testament Bible verses over me. Finally, when I was 17, she kicked me out of the house while screaming scripture at me, calling me a drug-addled whore. As an adult, I've observed her do some unsettling things, like putting down multiple perfectly healthy dogs, faking medical emergencies so that I would visit her, and putting up mass amounts of pictures of George all over her house. As I said at the start of this, I've put a lot of time in talking with my relatives, mostly my dad and my mom's siblings, about all that has transpired. A few months ago, I confronted my mom about the kidnapping. I asked her if she knew what she did. Her response chilled me. She smiled and looked me in the eye for about 10 seconds, and with the most emotionally dead expression I've ever seen, and said, "Kind of." I realize this isn't the scariest thing on this sub, but after that I made the decision to not contact my mom. Almost anyone who has ever gotten close with her believes she is a diagnosable sociopath. It's been a long time coming. and I hope that I never meet her again.
My Encounter with Negan at an Abandoned Hospital by Boy Genius. To give a little bit of a background, I'm a film student in college right now, and me and my buddies are always trying to find new locations to film our movies at. I make horror movies, so all the places I'm looking for and exploring are abandoned. And tonight, me and my group of friends, there are 10 of us total, decided to check out this abandoned hospital down the street from our school. They'd been there before and said it was a great spot for filming, and that I should check it out. Tonight was that night. So when we got there, I had my Nikon DSLR out with a handheld LED light attached to the top of the camera that scout out the place when we got inside. I didn't film any of this encounter because I usually only film the inside of these places, but I had my camera and my light out to shine the way through. I was leading the way down this narrow path that led down to these walls that we had to climb on to get to the roof of this place. There, we would proceed across one of them to get into the rooms inside. Because I was carrying my camera and a bag, I was trying to look for another way up. So I walk a little further down this narrow path and I start noticing a lot of clothing and random shoes and cardboard boxes laying around the area. There was even this empty sleeping bag. That's when I knew that we weren't probably alone and were likely going to run into someone if we made the wrong move. One of my friends was walking behind me down the path and notices a door to my right. It's closed. And my guess is that it was locked and not worth trying, but he already had his hand on the door handle and starts tugging. I look over, and it barely creaks and cracks open. But something's holding it from the inside. I shine my LED on the inside and I see a shirt tied to the inside of the door handle in another part of the room. It starts acting like a lock. But my friend, being the way he is, tugs it again and rips his shirt right off. And the door swings right open. Inside there is someone sleeping on what looks like a table or a couch alongside with a group of terrifying looking people sitting by the light inside the room. They all stop and stare right at us. In the short glimpse I got, my friend yells, "Oh shit! We gotta get the fuck out of here!" and slams the door and just bolts past me. I was standing there a little bit shaken, almost feeling like I should apologize, but I just followed instead. My other 8 friends are already on the roof by this point, and they asked what's going on, and we just ran for our lives and got out of that area. I hear the door in the path swing open, but I couldn't look back. From there, me and my friends rendezvoused back into a higher part of the area, away from the entrance leading into the building. There's a small gap that you could jump across to get to one of the roofs of the building that my other friends were on. About 4 of them follow us and jump across, ready to get out of there, but the others stay on the roof and watch us, stuck like statues. I look at them confused at what they're staring at. I've begun to hear this metal dragging on concrete. I turned around and there's a crazy looking man, maybe in his mid-20s, dragging a baseball bat with nails along the end, walking towards us as he drags the bat along the concrete, acting just like Negan from The Walking Dead. My heart begins to sink at this point. I turn off my light, and all that's shining is the moonlight. I keep my hand on my pocket knife, desperately trying to think of anything to do if he starts swinging, but I know there's no way I would come out alive if he tried anything, or if I tried anything. Plus, I gotta take care of my camera. He walks closer to us, and the first thing he says is, "You're gonna keep that light off." And everyone is silent. I am practically shaking. He then starts circling around us as he says, "You guys are never gonna come back here, right?" He walks past me and sees the camera and raises his bat saying, "And you're gonna put the fucking camera away." At this point, I'm barely able to stammer off yeah, It's off. He looks over to my friends watching on the roof past the gap at this point, and he says, jump. And they all stand silent. The guy says again, fucking jump across right now. Just run and jump. You'll fucking make it. Keep in mind, the gap doesn't look that bad, but the drop is fatal if you don't make the jump. And my 4 friends are all staring down at the drop, fearing about what could happen. One of them says, I don't think I can make it. And this Negan guy replies, run and jump or else you're gonna fucking regret it. So my friend step back and runs and barely makes the jump. From there, one by one, the other 3 make the jump across, all while this Negan-looking motherfucker standing right behind us with his bat, again dragging along the concrete like he's Pyramid Head or something. Once we all got across, he says, you're never gonna come back here again, you understand? And we awkwardly apologize and run away back to our cars in the distance. I get into my car and look back at the area, and he's still standing there watching us with his bat as we speed off. Realistically, we probably could have ganged up on him as a group, but if anything bad happens, who knows who else would be back there. Sadly, the hospital was a no-go from there on out. But I'd still be looking around for some sick locations. What scared me the most about this was how fearless and disturbed this guy looked. He definitely seen some shit and had undoubtedly used that bat before on someone else. He looked like a killer. He was a killer. And it was his calmness that really got to me. Definitely a lesson learned. But regardless, let's not meet again, Negan guy.
Mom got a messed up, sick, disturbing call 2 nights ago. Submitted by Pikachu Assassin. So, 2 nights ago, my mom received a phone call from an unrestricted number talking about some messed up stuff and called me to come get her. So I'll pretty much lay out everything that happened. At 3:38 a.m., I got a text from my mom asking if I was still up. I replied yes and was curious as to what she was wanting since it was a work night for her and she is always in bed early. My father's a firefighter and it was a night he was on shift, so I knew he wasn't home. Less than a minute after I replied, she called me, and I answered, and it was my mom, very upset. Crying, actually. And was asking me to come pick her up from home since I live only 2 streets away from her, so it takes me most of 2 minutes to drive to her house. I immediately said yes and throw in my Bluetooth speaker thing I have to start getting dressed and grab one of my pistols and proceed out my door. I grabbed one of my pistols because I'm unsure what's going on, and since I have a concealed carry license, it's not uncommon for me to carry. As I'm rushing to get ready, I'm asking what's wrong. She tells me that about 3:28 she got a phone call from a restricted number and answered her phone since it woke her up. Upon answering it, she said some guy started talking, who she didn't recognize. She's unclear what he initially started saying when she picked up since she was still out of it from just waking up. But she was on high alert when the man said he was babysitting a 9-year-old girl named Ashley. And earlier on when she was on the couch with him, he did stuff to her, basically saying he molested her. Obviously, my mom is completely blindsided by this, and is immediately starting to ask who she is speaking to, asking if this is some kind of sick prank and says not to call her again and hangs up. Immediately, the restricted number calls back and tries talking to her again, and then she states that this better not be some sick prank again and hangs up. So he calls a 3rd time and is saying stuff again, though my mom wasn't sure what he was saying since at this point she was very uncomfortable and headed to the kitchen to turn on all the house lights and grab her knives and hung up. The number calls a 4th time and my mom tells him, listen up, I'm pretty much done playing your games. I'm going to call the cops. Who is this? In which she got an angry reply. No, you listen up. I'm not here to answer your questions. You're here to listen to me. Now you're going to stay on the line and listen to everything I did to this girl. Otherwise, I'm going into that room and doing it again. My mom hangs up again, and that's when she texts and calls me and stays on the line with me as I'm quickly getting over and heading over there. While on the line, he calls a 5th time in which my mom ignores the call, but she says he left a voicemail this time. While on my way there, which again I live 2-minute drive away, he calls a 6th and 7th time, which my mom ignores, and then that's when I pulled up to the side of her home. Also, not sure if this is some weird coincidence or not, but as soon as I'm about 2 or 3 houses up from hers to pull up, he has already stopped calling. That being said, I was still around the corner, so her home wouldn't have been in the sight yet when they stopped. She just jumps in my car and we drive to this police station. I am also a firefighter for my city, so I knew a cop working, and I knew I'd rather bring all this up to him as opposed to just calling some random 911 operator. So we get there and explain everything to him, and my mom tells him about the voicemail. She says she doesn't want to listen to it and asks the cop if he can maybe get a sense of what my mom is talking about in regards of this number calling. So the cop listens to it and says it's about 15 seconds long and says, yeah, you probably don't want to listen to that. Anyways, I ask if it's possible to trace a restricted number since I thought you could, but he said he doesn't think you can. So he goes in the back and gets his supervising officer to get his input on what could be done. The supervising officer confirms that a restricted call can't be traced and says unfortunately there's not really anything that can be done. He asked my mom if she either recognized the man's voice or knew a little girl named Ashley, or heard the sounds of the little girl basically crying or struggling on the phone, and my mom said no. So therefore there really isn't any way or any reason to get a detective involved. He also suggested that there's probably a strong possibility that this is just some guy fabricating this whole story because that's how this weirdo gets off. Just kind of crazy that out of any random number this dude would call, it happens to be my mom's. The officer said best case scenario, my mom's cell phone provider most likely could get the trace of the call to see the number and who it belongs to, but assured us that most likely the phone company would be absolutely not willing to give us the information unless the orders were from a judge. So basically we just filed our report and I brought my mom home and waited until my dad got off in the morning. Has anyone ever heard of something like this happening before? And should I try to get a hold of the company and see if I can get any info at all? I'm sure it would help my mom feel at ease if the number was from a few states over opposed to a local number. But I don't know, it just seems weird and to try to brush this whole thing off and hope that they never call my mom again. The way I see it is if someone makes a bomb threat to a school, which is usually always just some kid or someone not serious at all, it is always treated as if it's true and becomes a huge ordeal, so why not treat a phone call of a little girl being molested not in the same category? Should I pursue getting info or not? Edit. So it's been 2 days and no calls, which is good. I stopped by my mom's phone provider and briefly explained the situation and was ultimately shot down, saying they could not release any information of the caller's information to my parents. Though my dad is pretty close with some officers and they are trying to work with them to get a subpoena from a judge, the phone company could release the info.
The Buff and the Liquor Thieves by Xeneology. I'm 20 now, but when I turned 18, my friend wanted me to take me to a club. He was 23, and I'd known him forever, mainly because I've gotten involved in some questionable activities with him when I was younger. But we were driving down the road across 7 Mile. We had a playlist on shuffle. Doughboys had just finished, and I went to a Blade Icewood song. It was around 9 p.m., and I had the window down because his AC was broke. When we stopped at a light, I put my arm outside, and on top of the area between the window and the roof, I could hear someone else driving up next to us. Sounded like it was S-Ham or N-A-T-A-S. I looked over to glance over for a moment, and it seemed like a dude was in the passenger seat, and he was just staring at me. I tried to look ahead and ignore him, but it made me, uncomfortable because, being white, I stood out pretty well against the questionable areas of the city. Just before it turned from red to green, I thought I saw some person in the passenger seat leaning forward, a bit like he was grabbing a gun from under the dash or beneath the seat. Luckily, they turned off the other way as we kept going straight, so it helped me breathe a lot easier. By the time we'd gotten to the club, I noticed that the same car with the same dudes from earlier were driving into the parking lot. I decided to roll up the windows at that point since they were pretty heavily tinted. Fast forward a bit, and we're heading into the entrance. My friend is being loud and trying to attract attention, but he was always like that for as long as I could remember. Unfortunately, I want to attract the least amount of attention as possible. When we finally got inside, though, I got my first sight of a strip club. At least, first for a while. I was having the time of my life. I couldn't drink, but we had some stuff back at the apartment. I went to go check up on my friend because he was downing drinks and I really didn't feel like having to watch him drunk because he got into fights whenever he blacked out. That's when I realized those dudes from the car were watching me. Suddenly, I wanted to get out all over again. But my friend didn't really understand because of the music, and I was trying to keep my voice down. He went to the bathroom. I saw two people who were watching us stand up and follow him in there. I must have been awkwardly standing there for 30 whole minutes before he came back. Within minutes, we were walking out of the club and then ran to the car. I tried asking him what was wrong, and he told me that they cornered him, robbed him of his wallet, and then held him at gunpoint for his buffs. For those of you who don't know, buffs are $2,000 to $3,000 aviators that people flex with. The South has their grills, and the West has their chains, and Detroit has their buffs. I was slightly relieved because they weren't targeting me, but I was also worried that they were going to come back and jack something else from us. He started to peel out of the parking lot to speed back home as fast as possible. By the time we were halfway to the apartment, someone had flagged us down while we were at a stop sign. He asked us if we knew, insert my friend's name here. Immediately after he said that, my friend told him that we didn't have any idea who that individual was. We were probably about a block away from the apartment, and I had no idea how they figured out where my friend lived. I think they probably looked through his phone and saw a text he sent to one of the girls he always invited over. Obviously, we couldn't go into the parking lot because those guys would know we were lying. At that point, I just had them take us to my aunt's house for the night. The next morning, when we got back to the apartment, the landlord told us a few of our friends had stopped by to pick up some stuff. Luckily, he didn't give them the entrance into the room without a key. Despite that, I let my friend lay low at my place for a few weeks. He got a new apartment, and he figured out a situation where he could finally avoid these guys who robbed him. After a week there was an armed break into the apartment, and I stole my friend's TV, Xbox, computer, clothes, PlayStation, laptop, and liquor. We'd built up for over 4 months, nearly 2 cupboards worth of liquor that was just stolen. In all honesty, I'm actually more angry that they took my liquor than anything else. As far as those assholes go, those people who seem to think that it's okay to mug people at gunpoint in strip clubs, I hope we never meet again.
Peeping Ken, submitted by E. Memer. When I was in my second year of university, I lived alone. It was a downstairs flat with my bedroom facing towards the street. I had some heavy green curtains, so I didn't mind too much. My friends lived about a 15-minute walk away, and I would go over there every day till sometimes around 3 or 4 a.m. or sleep over. I had a long-distance boyfriend at the time, so would sometimes be up late Skype sexing. Halloween rolls around, and I'm out with my friends. I decided to go back to my house and be a sexy Skype supergirl for my boyfriend. We get into it, and we're having a great time. The curtains closed, the lights off, just to be safe. I had a drunk man to try to get in one time. I fell asleep early and left the curtains open. It had been super creepy. I woke up to the sounds of someone trying to push open the front door. When I looked up, there was a man staring. Stood so close with his nose almost touched the window. I'd freaked out and spent the night in the living room. So, the lights were off, curtains shut, and I noticed a kind of flickering in my peripheral and looked around. While meeting at the bottom, the curtains are parted very slightly near the top. Through the gap, there appears to be a trail of steam rising. I cover myself and get up to investigate. I have to get up and stand on my tiptoes to see through. The source of the steam was a man's mouth, hunched over and panting, exposed at the waist, violently stroking his member. I tried to quickly rearrange the curtains, grabbing my laptop and hiding in the living room. A few days later, there is a pink envelope waiting for me when I walk through the door. As I pick it up, very small change falls out. Written on the lip of the envelope in a jagged, capital letters, "I mean you no harm." A horrible, cold feeling spread throughout my body. Dread overlapped my shock. I'd never felt anything like it. I turned the card over to read the address side. There, in the same handwriting, "To the girl in the front room." Opening it, I see it's quite a traditional sort of card. Cream with the delicate watercolor of bouquet on the front. "Thinking of you" in gold curvature next to it. The inside was completely covered by a message completely in capitals, some letters backwards, and other words misspelled. I gave the card to the police, so can't recite the whole message verbatim, but the essence was, "I'm an old man who has lived on the street for a long time. Wasn't sure if it meant my street or the streets in general. More on that later. You made me the happiest I have ever been in my life on Halloween. I am sorry if I scared you. You are very beautiful. I love to watch you whether you are working on your computer or touching yourself. Please leave your curtains open just a little bit for me. For each time you do this, I will post a couple of pounds through your letterbox. Signed, Ken." I called my friends, then got the police to come around. Basically, they really couldn't do anything. They took the card as evidence, gave me a case number, and said that they would have a patrol car drive past my house in the near future. I stayed at the friend's house for a week and had one of them stay over at mine after that. That wasn't quite the last of Ken. Sometimes there would be knocking at my window, but kept my curtains 100% closed. 3 or 4 months of no incidents later, we got snow. I was leaving my house, now in the habit of checking my curtains every time I left or got back to the house. I see a set of footprints tracing the entire front window, back and forth, like someone had been pacing. After I moved, my friend had a job where she would check the local electrical register. We did find a K. Mordeau lived in my previous street. We did no further investigations. Because it was a student-y area, I would walk past that house on my way home for the next 2 years. A while after I'd moved out, I saw that the windows had been completely covered in newspaper, stuck from the inside. Seemed like someone was having trouble with Ken still coming around. Let's not meet again, Ken. My Stalker in the 8th grade. Submitted by Pancake. I recently found this sub, and by recently I mean less than an hour ago, and decided on posting a story that I usually repress, but it every so often comes flooding back to my memory. In the 8th grade I had a stalker, one that I never saw, and one that never said anything in malice towards me. Back in the 8th grade, probably halfway through the school year, I received a phone call from an unknown caller. Usually, I would not answer for a number I didn't recognize, or sometimes I would do so in an accent, but I would always hang up after a second or two. Things changed, however, when the second I answered I heard a man say my full name in a questioning tone, like if he was asking for confirmation that it was me. Being just a kid and thinking this was one of my parents' friends or someone I could talk to, I told him that was me. Big mistake. But I didn't know at the time. The first phone call I don't remember much of, except that he hung up not long after I said that was me. Some time passed, maybe less than a week, when I got an unknown call again. I didn't answer and I kept getting spam calls. So I finally answered and this guy was asking me about what shows I like to watch. I got the idea that maybe I shouldn't be talking to this guy, so I hung up. Not much longer, a couple calls came in until I said to stop calling me, and he responded with something to the effect of, Hanging up mid-conversation is rude. My dad heard me and asked who I was talking to, so I told him that I didn't know and handed him the phone. My dad asked who this was and to stop calling my number in this angry dad tone. Then he got a confused face for a second, before getting really angry and shouting at them before they abruptly hung up. My dad later told me that this person knew my father's name, Carlos, and had told him "Don't be so angry, Carlos," before hanging up. Pretty soon these calls would happen at least once a day, and I would almost always hand the phone to my dad for him to yell at the guy. We told all our friends and family to stop if they were prank calling me. We tried to get police involved, and we also contacted my middle school saying there was a guy being creepy with me. The guy never called during school hours, and he usually would only call first when I was home alone, but soon switched up to calling around the time my father got home from work. This guy sounded young. For a long time we thought my uncle or their friends were playing pranks on us. He sounded maybe mid to late 20s, and sounded sort of Latino. Never had an angry tone, and never said anything malicious. But he was a stalker, and he knew the names of my parents, sisters, and my dogs. Some cousins and my grandparents. He never called when we had company over, and it was never after 8 p.m. At one point I was sitting in my room and got a call. By this point it was nearing the last few weeks of school, and because this guy never said anything bad and police really couldn't do anything, I just answered the phone and asked what he wanted. I remember clear as day, he was listing off video games, Red Dead Redemption, Modern Warfare 2, Halo 3, etc. I looked to my distant and saw that he was reading off the list in order of my games were, top to bottom. I stood up and looked out my window, but nobody was there. After the list was done, I just stood there and he told me something about having a good taste in games and we should play sometime. At this moment I was scared shitless. I cried and called my dad. He came home early, and when we realized like idiots that he could just change my number, we changed my number and I purged my Facebook account and we all set our accounts to private. Maybe 6 months later we moved, and after changing the number I never got any calls from this guy again. The reason I came to tell this story is because I've been getting unknown phone calling me for the past few days again, and I never answer them anymore. But telling my girlfriend about it, she reminded me about the guy, so I will be changing my number soon as precaution. Any questions I will answer because there are a few stories I left out due to length.
She Made Up a Song About Me by Venison Chucks. This happened about a year ago, and I'd honestly forgotten about it until I heard another story on Let's Not Meet, and it brought it to the front of my mind. My educational and professional backgrounds are firmly rooted in government and public policy. My chosen field is generally thought as useless, low-paying, and without many opportunities to actually practice or advance in it. So, you can imagine how happy I was when I got an offer to be a legislative director for a very high-profile state legislature. Things were pretty interesting at first. We lost our chief of staff to a better-paying job in a private sector about 2 months in, so I took over the day-to-day operations of managing the office, managing my boss, and dealing with every entitled constituent, pushy lobbyist, and hoity elected official under the sun. Even though my job was getting harder the nanosecond, I was happy to be doing it. I am a wonk at heart, and I was a wonk heaven in that office. This is until the crazy people started calling and writing and worse, visiting the office. If you've never worked in an elected official's office, let me give you a little rundown. Most people who reach out are normal, albeit sometimes angry, frustrated, scared, or all of the above. That's okay. These are the people you want to hear from, and if you can, try to make happy. Conversely, there is a subset that will also make contact, and they will make you regret your decision to put off law, business, and grad school for another year. It seems that every untreated, depressed, bipolar, psychopathic, and every schizophrenic adult within a 50-mile radius will reach you about some of the craziest shit. They've seen your boss on television, mentioned it in the newspaper, or attended a town hall meeting and decided to push the limits of the legislature's responsibility and accountability as far as they will stretch. I had to reach out to state troopers stationed in the Capitol for protection on multiple occasions. The legislative session wasn't too far away, and its approach was inspiring to them to reach out. I first encountered these people while I was interning in DC. I was working in the personal office of a committee chairman whose name everyone would recognize if I mentioned it, and because of his visibility, everyone and their dog would call. It was fall of 2008. Economy had gone to shit. Obama was about to win the election, and I had motherfuckers calling me about the government using the emissions from microwaves to read the mind of every single American and saying that they represented multi-trillionaires who had every dime the government needed to get the country's finances back on track. That was the type of shit that I was expected to encounter when I started this job, so naturally, I encountered something else. I went into the office super early one morning to get the jump start on my day. My boss had yelled at me for about an hour the night before about something that wasn't my fault, and I was in a particularly bad mood because of it. I figured driving into my work early would help me keep my attitude in check. As I sorted the mail and halfway listened to Robin Meade bantering away on the giant flat screen we had in the office, I realized that I wasn't alone. A blonde, middle-aged woman was hovering over me at my desk, silently staring at me. Normally, the interns sat in the outer office and managed a flow of visitors, but as I was there before the Capitol was officially opened, it was just me and the four walls, or at least it was supposed to be. I don't know how long she'd been standing there, but clearly she had been waiting for me to notice her. When I asked her how could I help her, her expression grew rather dark and agitated, as though someone had flipped on a switch. She raised one arm and started tugging at her ratty hair and humming, but didn't respond to me. I felt every fiber of my body inwardly groan in exasperation as I realized that this woman wasn't quite all there and was missing about a couple of AA batteries. I'd recently had a crazy visitor lived in the district, barely speaking English, didn't understand anything about national or state government, pull some next level fuckery the week before. So between that and how irritated I was not in the mood for any more literal nonsense. I cleared my throat and put on my best "I'm only pretending to be nice to you so you'll vote for my boss in November" grin, and asked her how could I help her yet again. It was then that I realized that I'd left the front door unlocked and now was paying the price. I also noticed that that woman had a child's backpack with her. It was pink, had some girly things painted on it, and it was stuffed beyond its natural capacity. I kept one eye on my visitor and the other on the hand holding this fuller than full backpack. I was sitting there looking at her cockeyed when she finally stopped humming and spoke. "Yeah, my mom's up in the legal department. Can I sit here and wait for her?" I blinked. I told her that I misheard her. She tried again. "Oh, my mommy has an appointment in the legal department on the second floor. Can I wait for her in your office?" That's when alarms started going off in my head. First, the state legislature doesn't have a legal department. There is a legal division that houses the general counsel and his team, but they're set up in a building 3 blocks away. Not on the second floor of the Capitol. There's nothing but legislative offices and support offices on that floor. There's also Chief of Staff. I'd been cruising on in the office directly below mine. I knew every inch of the second floor, so that was strike one. Secondly, the legal department wasn't open. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. And given that we weren't in session, few staffers were at work before 9:30. The legal division supported us for the most part, and kept a similar schedule. Third, the legal department doesn't take appointments of random individuals, or really anyone for that matter. When they weren't doing legislative research, reconciling bill drafts of current state law, or defending the legislature against lawsuits and other legal actions, they weren't doing much of anything besides talking to their friends on the legislative side. I knew this woman was a bit off and lying. I told her that there wasn't any legal department, and she started pulling her hair again and humming even louder. And so help me, I'd never been so frightened of humming in my entire life. There's something menacing about it, especially with the way she glared at me and yanked at her scalp. Some of her ratty, thinning hair was already falling onto my desk. It slowly dawned on me that this woman wasn't just off a rocker. She might be potentially dangerous, and I'd upset her by exposing her with an explanation. I suddenly remembered that we had a panic button that summoned the state troopers somewhere in the office. I tried to think where it was, and how could I get to it? As I asked her again how could I help her, every hair on my neck was standing up. She repeated her story about waiting for her mother, but now wanted to use a phone to call her. Specifically, she wanted to use my phone, which was on my desk, as usual. "It's not charged, ma'am," I lied. Someone chose that moment to send me a text, and my phone lit up like a fucking goddamn Christmas tree. I just ignored it and kept smiling at her. I even put on one more pretend helpful tones that suggested that she speak to the state troopers at one of the entrances. It didn't work on her. She stopped humming, but kept glaring at me as she broke into song. I can't remember all the words, but her song was along the lines of wicked people being punished, and it included my first name, which was on my nameplate. I know better than to show her fear in these situations, so I pretended not to notice her demented song and simply said, "I'm sure the troopers can help you find your mother. Our office isn't open yet, so you can't stay here." I got up and offered to walk her down to where the troopers were. For some reason, though, this actually worked on her. She was still unhappy and very crazy, but she slowly backed out to my office. I followed her out to make sure she left. She walked backwards all the way to the front door, glaring and pointing at me, until she was standing in the hallway. After she was out, I locked the doors immediately and called the troopers to my office. If you think she just left, then you're absolutely fucking wrong. Our door was partly made of frosted glass of a design that exposed to regular glass. She was there, standing and staring at me through the frosted part, and hummed until two troopers showed up and escorted her forcefully out of the building. I found out later that the woman had pulled the same shit in the governor's office and 4 other legislative offices. She sometimes had luggage with her instead of the girl's backpack she'd brought with her to my office. She actually bit an intern on the face, which had gotten her banned from the building, but she still showed up super early to avoid being detected. Just as a quick bonus thing, when I was interning in DC, a certain former Grey's Anatomy actor called to speak with the congressman for whom I worked. He told me his name and that he was calling from Los Angeles, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I asked for the purpose of his call. We were required to ask everyone, no matter how famous. That's when he lost his shit at me, and that's when I realized his name sounded familiar, and he was pretending to be an actor. So, creepy, crazy lady who made up a reason to be in my office, and then serenaded me with how I'm a wicked person who needs to be punished. Let's not meet again. The Drug House at the End of Our Street by Cobb 94. A few years ago, under mysterious circumstances, a small house at the end of my street was passed off to a drug dealer, and they had attracted all sorts of strange people. We'd been told by our local police department to report suspicious activity. They've been to the drug house multiple times and have made multiple arrests, but they seem unable to just shut it down for good for some reason that eludes me to this day. One night, while driving home from work, a little past midnight, I saw a man sitting in the front lawn with his legs spread out on a bicycle next to him. Startled, I was about to ask him if he was okay when I got a good look at his face. He had blood dripping down from his forehead, and he was grinning ear to ear, grinning uncontrollably. I told him that he needed to leave or I would call the cops, and he replied, "It's too late." And then he got up and rode away on his bike. I routinely see extremely creepy looking people walking past this side of the road. People dancing and other people riding bikes. Many of my neighbors have had their homes and cars broken into, and my parents' van has been broken into about 3 times before. One morning, I got a text from my mother asking if my girlfriend had sat in her car or smoked something unusual in it. I thought this was an odd question and was kind of offended, as my girlfriend is a very considerate person. Also, she doesn't smoke cigarettes, which my mom found in the car. Someone had broken into her van, smoked an entire pack of smokes, and had put them out in various places. They had have just left when my mom went out to the car, as the seat was still warm and the cigarettes were still smoldering. However, nothing was missing. Someone just used my mom's car to smoke in. We found addicts stealing mail and boxes from my neighbor's front porch, and I've seen drugs change hands several times, all reported to the police. A guy who I went to school with from the time we were about 5 years old, ended up buying from there and dealing himself for a bit before ended up dying of a drug overdose. I've recognized people going in and out of the house as well. I would say the creepiest people by far, though, were the ones who were most active 2 years ago and terrorized not just my neighborhood but several others for blocks and blocks without ever getting caught. Ultimately, ghosting after their last act that made the news. It started out weird but non-threatening. My neighbor's security cameras would catch them rearranging their plants, or just stumbling through people's yards, seemingly in a haze. Sometimes they laid down in someone's yard, and seemingly just look up at the sky and talk to one another. Then they started breaking into people's houses. One thing this group of 3 guys had in common was that they all wore white hoodies and were good at hiding their faces so none of the cameras would ever see them. They also would park their car a block away from wherever they would be, and anytime they would do something new, surveillance of them would be posted onto my neighbor's Facebook group. It was chilling to watch them occasionally roll through my property, but also seeing them on other people's property, sometimes right next to their bedroom windows. One video showed them just watching my neighbors sleep through their window for almost an hour. Several miles away, a family with a lot of surveillance cameras got a shock when one of them randomly checked their security footage from the night before. He heard a noise, and while he didn't think the video would turn up anything, he just wanted the peace of mind. What he found was that these men in white were stalking his family. There were tons of video clips of them moving around the property, peering through windows, but something was different about it this time. This time, they all had guns. Not only that, but they left enough zip ties for each person that lived in the house, as they knew many people lived there. At one point, in one of the videos, they looked at the cameras and realized that they were being recorded and left. That was the last we saw of them. The news reported on it, and I think they just got a little too spooked to try something again. At least, not for a long while. The moral of the story is, if you think there's something weird going on in your neighborhood, a little bit of footage can go a long way. Thanks for listening. It seems like you've made it to the end of the video. I welcome you, you proud soldier. But if you'd like to make sure that more videos like this happen, consider donating a small amount on Patreon. Barring that, you can share the episode on Twitter, or just tweet at me to see what I got going on. Or, if you just like to talk to me, go to my Discord, no Patreon required. Enjoy your creepy content, you creepy connoisseur. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, signing out.